We have three big things today. One, what is the biggest summary from two conferences this week? One, because Paige just joined as a director at the National Association of Realtor. She gets access to fancy things. So that first part of the conference up there is a fancy thing. And the second is what we believe is the best economic news in the real estate industry, which is the Keller Williams research division. They spent about 6 months on this. What we do is we take in that week, we put it down into the first part of the section. Number two, we've brought that into local Houston data. And then number three, we've helped you see what that looks like in practice.
All right, so we're going to go national, we're going to go Houston, and then we're going to dive into some local things.
So let me start with probably the single biggest statistic and one of the most important things when you look at this home sales trend is if you look at the 2024 data, this is the purple line or pink line on your far right side, you'll see that the real estate market, it was over 30 years ago that the real estate market in terms of number of home sales was lower. It's a huge, huge implication. Again, if your clients felt it last year that it was slower or more difficult or that houses weren't selling or things were difficult to go through, you're right, because it was not until 30 years before 1995 where it was a slower market in terms of volume.
Which probably means half the people on this call weren't even born then.
Here's the big thing, and this is the big thing from the stage. So let me dispel you with this, is Gary Keller from the stage says it's not going to get easier this year, and it's not, in his estimation, not going to get easier for the next 2 to 3 years. So those quote unquote easy deals, the easy times from 21 that a lot of people saw, he's like, don't expect it now, don't expect it next year, don't expect it the year afterwards. And if you liked your 2024, you'll probably like your 2025.
Well, that's rays of sunshine, Bob.
Yeah, might as well start with that.
Yeah.
But here's a big thing it goes into. And again, this is also one of the most fascinating data points. And kind of let me again walk you through this. The blue line, which is the long-term trend line of 4%, is about what houses appreciate every year, again, for the long term. Cost of materials, cost of construction, cost of labor, everything goes up over time. That's kind of your inflation plus a little. When you look back for where it said 21% above the line, you're effectively leading into the Great Recession, where you had an economic cycle that brought house prices up a lot. Then we had a dip where we underinvested in housing. And since about COVID times, houses have been more expensive than quote unquote they should be for the long-term trend line. Now, again, this is your money slide, especially for sellers. Right now, we're sitting about 10%, or houses are about 10% more expensive than they should be. And the reason that this is such a powerful case for sellers is, right, nobody knows when this is going to correct, right? You see, before it ran 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years above. We're currently in the 5th year above. So your conversation for sellers is, if you are happy to hold your house and live in it for a long, long time, you're fine. But if you think you need to get out in the next 2 to 4 years, this is potentially a really good year to get out because we are running about 10% more on home prices than we should. Now, here's your flip for buyers. When you think about it for buyers, right, you have the same risk factor in terms of what is the market of the moment. But think back 15 years ago and think to your neighborhood, right? What houses do you wish you bought in your neighborhood 15 years ago?
All of them.
Right? Because in the long term, prices on this, they go up. And so for your buyers, you're really trying to help them buy smart, right? Good properties, avoid the 9 kisses of death. And they're getting to the standpoint of, you're not looking to buy real estate in the moment, try to top the moment. What you are looking to do is buy real estate and hold for the long term.
Essentially, the concept is you can't time the market. If you needed to sell immediately after purchasing, that may not be the best situation. But if you're in a position to be able to hold long term, the trend line suggests that that is a very good investment over time.
And again, we're starting with the national data. We'll show you what this looks like at the Houston level and then at the neighborhood level. But this is a really powerful and impactful message, especially right now for your sellers, because you're trying to help them avoid something that could be a problem. As we look into this too, and again, this goes back to buyers that are like, oh, is the market going to crash? Oh, I'm going to get this great deal. Oh, I just wait another year or two. What is so unique about, again, Houston real estate and again, national real estate is in the long term, you'll see it goes up. The big things you'll see here in the 2006 to 2011 timeframe around the Great Recession was where we gave back a lot of real estate prices. And so one of the things that we're going to go through is there any case out there that we're about to enter one of those other cycles? Again, we'll go through the data, but the short answer is no. And so the reason that this slide is also so powerful for your buyers is because over time, real estate prices appreciate. Paige, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would just say that if your buyers look back to the Great Recession, this is the power of understanding the difference between national, regional, and local data, is that in Houston, there was only one market that gave back 20% of appreciation, and that was the downtown market during that time. The rest of the market maybe gave back 1 or 2% because historically, Houston is not a large, fast appreciating market. In a normal market, we're somewhere between 3 and 4% each year. We're not a California market that expects to have 18% a year appreciation and is mad if they don't.
Now, here's the things, again, that you want to go through so you can be the local economist of choice to your clients. Because, right, they hear a lot of stuff in the national news, they hear a lot of stuff in the local news. How do you help them understand what's really going on? And so here are the 3 things that matter to real estate, right? The price of real estate, 1, 2, the cost of money, and 3, employment, right? Because if people don't have jobs, they can't buy houses. And so when we look through this, the price of real estate is measured by affordability. Again, what affordability is if I spend money on the principal and the interest as a percent of my income, typically, how much am I spending? And again, that's a function of how expensive are houses. And one of the things that you'll notice from this graph that stands out is houses are the second least affordable that they have been since the early 1970s. Again, I'm going to say this again. This is a big point. Houses are the second least affordable that they have been since the 1970s. And one of the big implications of this is that for people who don't have a lot of money sitting around, right, like first-time homebuyers,
right?
First-time homebuyers,
they're at the beginning of their career and probably have not amassed a nest egg to be able to have a down payment.
and that is why first-time homebuyers are not only the oldest they've been at 38 years old, but they are the smallest percentage of the market that they have been at anytime this millennium. It's
okay. So say that again. First-time homebuyer, the average age is now what?
38 years old.
That again, really speaks to affordability.
Because what you're thinking about in affordability, and this is important for your different segments of the market, right? Your luxury market, very different than your entry market, is your entry market, you're struggling with the price of houses being expensive. Also, again, first-time homebuyers are low, but related to the cost of homes, right? Home insurance is up a lot.
Yeah, I want to speak a little bit to this because we spent a lot of time at my conference talking about this in particular. The chief data officer at CoreLogic, CoreLogic provides our back end for our MLS system, and they spend a lot of time crunching numbers. They're a group of data scientists that really put out so much great information, and they talked specifically about climate change and how it affects. You've got wildfires, you've got floods, you've got hurricanes, you've got tornadoes, you've got snowstorms, right? There are things that happen more often, it seems. The average insurance cost nationwide since 2019 has gone up 35%. In Texas, our average has increased 55%. The big takeaway that I want you guys to really hammer home on this slide is that when you're working with your buyers, please don't just get them pre-approved. Get an insurance partner, because the insurance cost and the tax cost is now more expensive. So principal and interest, taxes and insurance. Taxes and insurance now is more expensive than the principal and interest payments, right? So it is critical critical that you are partnering with an insurance agent up front so your buyers understand what those costs are so they don't end up in a bad situation.
Related to that, we talked a lot about this in our last market update. Mortgage rates, they are expected for this year to be about 6.5%. One of the
Bob, real quick, that is bang on what the chief economist for the Mortgage Bankers Association talked about, that their expectation is 6.5%, and that maybe we'll get a rate cut in Q3, maybe. But their expectation, they said very clearly, the 6.5, you got to really understand that's the average. There's going to be times that we're hovering around 7. And when we get to 7, a lot of buyers pump the brakes. There'll be some times when we get down to the low 6s. So managing that and watching that for your buyers is key.
The reason that this slide is important too, and again, this gets back to how you can help different segments of clients, and again, how the market is bifurcating, is part of the reason that we've had less inventory is because people have mortgage rates that are under 4%, and so they're staying in those houses. Two other interesting statistics. One, 38% of homes have no mortgage, and
Wow.
two, 76% of homes have 50% or more equity. Again, 76% have 50% or more equity. The implication of those statements is when you're talking to sellers, is some sellers have the opportunity to make life decisions because they have a lot of money in their home. Prices have increased, they've got a lot of equity, they may not have a mortgage. Those people are in very different conversations than people who are starting out and may not be able to afford the differences of home prices right now. That's again where you were able to add a lot of counsel. Remember, the third thing in terms of that impacts real estate, again, first is cost of the houses, second is cost of the money. Again, expectation is cost of the money will be up, is jobs. And so when you look overall, our unemployment is good, right? 4%, that's a pretty darn healthy unemployment rate, which means 96% of the population has jobs. But your big question, or a question a lot in the minds of buyers, is I'm going to get this great deal because there's going to be all these job losses because, Washington, D.C. is going to fire everyone. The question is that realistic? And so when you think about that, it's a function of what we call GDP, or the gross domestic product, which is the sum of all of the goods and services in the U.S.
Essentially, Bob, could you say it a different way, right? The GDP is, are we growing as an economy? Are we spending money? Are we spending too much money? Or are we not? Are we shrinking as an economy, right? That's the way to define that.
That's your GDP growth rate, right? Your GDP is just a measure of that. Think about your household income. How much money do you make as your household? The GDP is that for the nation. In this case, right, our GDP, or the nation's income, is still growing. So that's, again, a good thing for jobs. And the other thing to look at in terms of future jobs and future money is inflation. And inflation is getting much closer to that 2% target that the Fed is looking for and has been looking for since the COVID era. And so
that's one of the reasons why we're not seeing rate cuts, right? Because the closer we get to this 2% inflation rate, which is what the government wants us to have, they're like, hey, look, the economy's going fine, jobs are where they need to be, and inflation's kind of where it needs to be. So I'm not going to change the interest rate.
That's exactly right. So if you, and this is, again, probably your most important slide. If some of those numbers didn't resonate with you, or you only found one takeaway, your goal on this is to think about how you help just one seller or just one buyer. And so out of that entire section, here should be your big three things, or big three things you remember and take through and then communicate out to help your clients. One, the expectation of what you got in 2024 is likely going to continue to 26 or 27, right? 2025 looks similar, 26 looks similar, 27 looks similar. So again, if you were happy with your 2024, keep doing the same things. If you were not happy with your 2024, it's on you to change something. Number two, and again, this is the big message and your big counsel to sellers, is because we are on a price basis above the long-term trend line, if sellers are happy to hold, let them hold for a long time and it can be their permanent house. But if they need to get out in 2 to 4 years, now may be a very good time to get out, because again, we're running above, quote unquote, where we should be. Your big message for buyers is, again, you've got to buy smart. And so this was the quote from the stage, and then I'm going to ask Paige to translate it. Is right. The quote from the stage is, don't wait for the right time to buy real estate, but buy real estate and give it time.
And I just don't like the language there because it sort of feels salesy, right? If you were to say that to someone, it feels like you're pushing them to not make a wise decision. And that's the antithesis of what our job is. In 2005, I took my first listing in Montrose. And it was a cute little bungalow, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. They had added on a kitchen, did some upgrades, and we listed it at $235,000. Now, who all on this call wish that they would have bought a lot of Montrose bungalows at $235,000, cute 3.2s? Yeah, all of them. I did some research on that house, and in 1996, that same house cost $96,000. Now, who doesn't wish they had bought it at 96 instead of 235? That property today, as a tear down, dirt only, is $650,000. So the goal here is it doesn't really matter where you were, whether you bought it in 2005 or 1996, where it has gone over some lumps and bumps over time as it is increased. But the key here is you have to be able to hold. That's 30 years of work of holding your asset. And that's the conversation that with your buyers you need to be having of how long will you hold this asset so that you can then help guide them to make wise decisions.
Yeah, Paige, it's an excellent overview and a great case study. That's exactly what that means. So let's see it for Houston. Because again, you started with the national trends, then we go to Houston trends, and then we go to the local trends in an example. So in Houston, and again, overall, we are at 4 months of inventory. A few things that are really notable about that 4-month mark. In many models, the 4 to 6 month mark is a balanced market. And so we are right at the beginning of a balanced market. Number two, this is the first time that we have seen 4 months of inventory or a balanced market at any point in the last 8 years. So this is a lot of additional inventory for Houston buyers. And again, for sellers, you're back to the same question of, right, when is the right time for me to sell? And would I rather get out now with what I have, knowing I've appreciated a lot, or do I try to eke out the last couple pennies, knowing that the market may change? Specifically, when you look at annual home prices, and again, we're only about 45 days into the year, you'll see that home prices are pretty consistent with where they've been from 2022, 23, 24, overall Houston, but down a little. However, when you look at the seasonality impact, one of the big things that you'll notice from the seasonality impact is that January usually has a lower median price than your busy spring, right? Typically for buyers who close between May, June, and July, they pay some of the highest rates for houses. And so your key in January and in parts of February is that the prices in Houston have been lower than they were on average last year. And that also is an encouragement for buyers looking for value and deals to get under contract in about the next 15 days. They usually will get a better deal than they will if they are closing in May, June, or July.
And that's largely because the inventory that most folks are shopping through have been on the market for a while. So those sellers are interested in ensuring that they get out this spring. And so when you have a buyer who shows up this time of year, that seller typically is a little more flexible than, say, if they came on the market in April and they want to, and they're selling the next month in May.
Yes. Other big thing to look at is our January, very consistent with our January of last year, right? The same narrative. 2025 should look similar to 2024. Notice that last year and prior years, February and March are usually busier than January. That's about how we're going to be tracking. For pending sales, you see we're nearly bang on for this week where we were this time 1 year ago. And our days on market is one of the more interesting statistics, right? Days on market is one of your leading indicators for price reduction. Again, back to your seller conversations. Days on market throughout this entire year of 2025, we have had higher days on market than we have at any point in the last 2 years. This week, we're about even. We're about balanced. This is going to be one of the big things to watch for price reductions, and then we're going to localize it because that's how you're helping your sellers get in advance of the trend in their neighborhood.
Right.
And specifically, this is again a really key slide, right? Your days on market are your number one leading indicator for price reductions. Your price reductions are your number one leading indicator for home price sales. Your price reductions, as you see, have spiked massively over the last 3 weeks as compared to the last 2 years. The implication of this slide for your sellers, again, broad Houston market, is that if they are looking to sell, consider getting out ahead of other competitive sales in their neighborhood. This is, again, an indication of where prices may go.
Yep. But remember, guys, because we're going to break this down in just a second, this is the broad market. So if you use this data, which is great data, and you're talking to a seller in a specific neighborhood, you're going to want to correlate that to ensure that that is the case in their particular neighborhood. But when somebody says, what's the overall Houston market doing? This is a snapshot of that.
And again, this is also key for your buyers. When you look at this, this is giving you the opportunity to negotiate in those markets that are softer. We'll see in a second.
Yep. In softer markets.
So this is exactly how you translate it. So, right, you take the big picture, the macro. You say, oh my gosh, houses are above the trend line. You look at Houston and you say the big takeaway there is that we have more price reductions than we've had a year ago. And let's look at a couple markets. We're going to go through this really quickly. In places here, Briar Grove, you see we are in an extreme seller's market and we're tighter than where we were 90 days ago.
Which, real quick, to the point, if you walk into Briar Grove and tell your buyers that there are price reductions everywhere across the board, and they are confused why they are competing with multiple offers, right? This is why the value of this localized data, because real estate really is about a niche market. What Briar Grove, as the crow flies in Briar Grove, it's going to be very different than the crow flying in these next slides.
So Katy Southwest, seller's market, pretty darn consistent with where we were 90 days ago. Braes Oaks, you see we've also gotten a little bit tighter, but we're still in a seller's market. 1960 Cypress North, balanced market, right? We're right at the 6 months of inventory. Downtown Houston, big swing. Now we're in a buyer's market. East End revitalized. We're in a buyer's market, a pretty darn extreme buyer's market. Again, remember that there's a big change between your luxury buyer and seller who's happy to hold, moving for life events, may own their house outright, and has access to lots of cash, versus your early buyer, your first-time buyer, that they've got a lot of debt, they've got things are expensive, you've got inflation at the grocery store, they're feeling squeezed, and they don't have a good opportunity to have a lot of excess money. And so you're seeing that play out in different markets, which is why it's so important. So again, what are your key takeaways, right? How do you use this data? 2 stories for you. From our 4 new agents that we brought on in about the last 120 days, I've got 2 stories for you. 1 buyer, 1 seller. So what Jay has done for buyers recently is he's been able to use this data. And one example of that is he had an out-of-town buyer, came through, and they came from a really competitive market. And in that competitive market, they flew in with the expectation that they had to compete, they had to give up their protections, they probably were going to pay more than asking. And so for most agents, you'd say, oh my gosh, this is my ideal buyer because they're just going to move fast. What Jay did, which was 100% right, is he said, let me show you the data, let me look out for your best interest. Put together a great kit, showed the data, showed that there was no way that they had to give up a whole bunch of protections because, right, we want and need our option period and our due diligence.
Absolutely.
Drove them through to where they had an opportunity to find value and get a good deal, right, better than they would have originally, and put them under contract on something that feels like value to them, and they're blown away. Tim, what he was able to do in Katy in a new construction neighborhood, the sellers had the expectation of, oh my gosh, look at all these gorgeous new houses going up at all these crazy prices. We're going to list at those prices. Not understanding 2 things, right? Just like you go buy a car, you drive it off the lot, it loses value. right? The new houses, especially lots of new houses, have a premium. And then two is when builders are struggling, they're giving all kinds of incentives away. And so the headline message of, oh, I'm going to go price like the headline message of this other brand new house, it's not apples to apples. Tim was able to explain the data and the trends, show them not what was happening in Houston, but within Katy, but specifically within their new construction area of Katy, gave them an opportunity to list for a good price rather than something that was beyond aspirational to help them make wise decisions. That's the key on how you use the data for your buyers and sellers to get them the best value and the best deals that you possibly can.
That's exactly right. The data should absolutely support the advice that you're giving. And instead of allowing, could you imagine if Jay had just said to his clients, sure, we'll pay over asking and give up all your contingencies. He wouldn't have been doing a fiduciary duty to that client. And so using the data to support what the market is, he actually wowed that client, but also set himself apart by doing the right thing, which is what we're called to do as agents.
And that's, again, the really nice thing is this is, 80, 60 days. It's easy to learn the data with a little bit of care, a little bit of focus, using the buyer guide, using the data, using the information. You're able to add a lot more value to your clients.
Okay, real quick, because we're coming up on time. These for those of you on our team, here's the updated schedule for us. For those of you on this call that want to come to our next webinar, we're going to be talking about sellers in the spring, some successful strategies to get those sellers launched with a focus on seller care. So we would love to have you back on the 5th. We've got a QR code if you'd like to sign up for that now. But we are looking forward to an action-packed February and early March.
Okay, Paige, it feels like it's time to talk about tariffs then.
God, everybody's so excited to talk about tariffs. I mean, who doesn't want to spend Friday morning at 9 o'clock talking about tariffs?
So again, this gets a little bit wonky. On any of the questions that you have, right, please let us know. Again, I'm going to go back to the overall activity, and then I'm going to talk about tariffs and what they are, and ultimately how you can explain them to your clients. We'll also be happy to give you these slides so you can use these slides directly as part of the conversation. Again, at the bottom, as we talked about earlier, things that matter to real estate: price of real estate, cost of money, and unemployment. When you think about the cost of money and unemployment, you're looking at what are the risks out there that could make money more expensive or what could take away jobs. And so one of the biggest things right now is unpredictable policy, right? A lot of the stuff of tariffs are in the news. There are natural disasters, especially think about the LA fires, other international conflict that's there. But for the purposes of the next couple minutes, we're going to talk about the unpredictable policy and tariffs. So when most people hear the word tariffs, they're like, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it means. Your easiest way to think about what a tariff is it's a tax. And rather than how the government collects most of their money now, which is a tax on you, right? You sell a home, the government takes a piece of that. Usually it's an expensive piece. In this
you
case,
make money, you submit your taxes April 15th. That's coming up. You pay tax. Yeah.
A tariff is imposed by the government on goods that come from another nation. And so you think about that and you say, okay, why, what are the reasons that you would want to tax goods coming from other nations? And so one reason for that, and this has been in the headline, is revenue, right? The concept of a external revenue service versus an internal revenue service. And you're like, okay, that's interesting. Sure, don't tax me. Go tax, the dirty foreigners, whoever they happen to be at the moment in the news. So let's go make revenue off them. Another big reason for tariffs is protecting infant industries, right? You probably have heard about Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie at the time was one of the richest people in the world. The reason that Andrew Carnegie in steel was so rich is because there were massive tariffs at the time on steel. And so building an industry that is protected by tariffs helps local business people because you're protecting the part inside a country. Okay. Number 3 is you say, right, if you push me, I'm going to push you. So pick a nation somewhere in Europe, they have tariffs on us. Well, you poke me in the eye, I'm going to poke you in the eye, right? Fine. We were all that way in elementary school. Number four, national security. So when you think about it, you're like, computer chips, AI technology, it's really important. And so we're going to protect the components around that and try to get everything inside the United States. And then number five is you saw political leverage, right? We're trying to deal with people that may not or should not be in the United States, according to some. And so the answer is, unless you take these people back, we're going to punish you. And so it's a way to use that as a stick. Okay. And then your answer is, if those are the reasons that tariffs may exist, what are the ways that tariffs are enacted? And typically, again, there's two ways to do it. Number one is you say is we're going to go after very specific things. Again, for example, in the olden days, it was about steel. Now it may come back. But when you look at AI, when you look at computer chips, when you look at strategic thoughts, our answer is we kind of want those in the US. So we're going to make it really hard for American companies and expensive not to buy from America. Great. Or
and the reason why you'd want that, right, is so that you're not reliant on a foreign country to give you the resources that you need to make your economic policy work, right?
Maybe, right. And again, this is a debate. We'll see it in a second, what this looks like over time. Or number two is what's called blanket tariffs. And that says those Canadians are so evil. They take advantage of us. We're just going to tax everything that comes from Canada because we want to punish them. And so, right, it's a way to say is we don't care what comes in. We just want the opportunity to say, this is how we do it to a nation. Again, typically you're getting back to more of either number three, right? You poke me in the eye, I poke you in the eye. Or two, I want something from you, and I'm going to use this either as a negotiating leverage or as a way to get that. So if this, again, is fascinating, and take all the colors.
That's a lot of color. I mean, come on. It's Friday morning.
But here's your big message out of this slide. The United States used to use tariffs a lot. When again, it's the yellow bar with the custom duties, tariffs. And so you see most of the money that came into the United States government up until about 1862, and then definitely up until 1913 when income tax was passed, we made most of our money in the United States from tariffs. And so then you've got to ask yourself the question, why do we stop? Right? So you see, again, that's the big message here is now it's predominantly income tax, but we used to do this. We used to use tariffs, and then we stopped. And the question is why, right? Did everybody lose their mind, or was there a real reason? And so what you think about, and again, this is also a graph that at first glance seems hard to read, but I want to walk you through the simple concept, is this explains the main reason why we stopped using tariffs as our primary policy. And I'll go through the details, but the short version is in an open trade policy, everybody wins because the pie gets bigger. Here's typically, again, how tariffs work in practice. Country number one puts tariffs on foreign goods from country number two. Okay, fine. What happens next? Then those imported goods from country number two, country B, become more expensive. Okay, so right, that gets back to the inflation narrative, right? You buy a TV from China, the TV is more expensive, right? I buy avocados from Mexico. Okay, avocados become more expensive. Then that country B retaliates, right? You poke me, I poke you. Doesn't matter if we're on the playground in junior high or if we are out dealing with some of the highest elected officials in the world. But you say, you do it to me, I do it to you. Okay, fine. Then country A's exports become more expensive in country B, right? Our Dell computers become more expensive in Mexico. Then, right, your buyers on both sides, right, your consumers of avocados in the US and your consumers of Dell computers in Mexico, they both suffer because, right, they're effectively paying more because most of the time the companies, they don't absorb the cost, they pass it along to the consumer, right? This is another form of competition. And then, right, this is number 6. Well, what happens when avocados are more expensive? Well, I buy less avocados. What happens when Dell computers are more expensive? Well, I buy less Dell computers. So typically, overall trade falls in all the countries. And then number 7, right, typically because trade is down, there's less people moving those boxes around, washing the avocados, stuffing the avocados. You go to your local restaurant, you're like, I don't know the guacamole as much, right? I tip a little less, right? Everything goes down, economic downturn. And then number 8, they say is, oh, well, we're not doing any business with Mexico anyways. We should just do everything here in America, right? So that's the calls for protectionism. So the big key message is for tariffs, they typically are a tax. They typically protect early industries. And right now they're being used for a lot of leverage. Specifically in the US, we use them a ton. And up until the early 1900s, that was the primary source of government revenue. Around that time, we said, oh my gosh, everybody is better off if we are able to trade, right? I don't need to grow avocados in my yard here because it's frozen grass. I'd much rather get them from Mexico where they're cheaper.
And Mexico said, I'd much rather buy your Dell computers.
Much rather buy your Dell computers.
Let's stop this and everyone have a better economy of scale in their own countries. Specifically, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, just to tie it back, that's why most of the economists and most of the companies and most of the analysts are saying this is a risk for real estate, because if we had to pay more money for lumber, more money for labor, more money for nails, more money for the supplies, it makes price of real estate higher.
Well, and specifically, can I speak to that real quick? One of the conversations is, there's the blanket suggestion of blanket tariffs on Canada. So we're going to number 2 on the right-hand side, blanket 25% on all the goods coming from Canada. Well, for those of us in real estate on this call, did you know that most of the lumber that builds new houses comes from Canada? So what happens when those builders, and we need new houses because we need new inventory. We saw on the inventory slide that we are still overall low for what we need for all of the US for numbers of housing and also locally as well. What happens when that builder has to pay 25% more for the lumber to build the new house? Do you think the builder just says, I'll just make 25% less? No, 2 things happen. Either one, he passes it on to the consumer, which housing prices is already high. So either the consumer now pays 25% more for that house because of the lumber, or the builder quits building because the demand's not there, right? So this is how it starts to impact our world in residential real estate in ways that you don't necessarily think about when you hear just overall tariffs.
Yeah, and I'll tie it back again to the things that matter, because we're going to watch this and we're going to keep you updated on this, on these market updates over the next couple months. 1, if tariffs come through, they will increase the price of real estate for new construction. Number 2, if tariffs come through, they will increase what people pay for things like avocados. If that is another form of inflation. If inflation comes back, well, the Fed sure isn't going to cut rates. Fed doesn't cut rates, that's going to impact cost of money. And 3, same thing on employment, is, again, this is part of number 7, number 8, is if we buy things less from other countries and if we sell less Dell computers, that will impact our job market, because then we won't need as many people. And so that's fundamentally the reason that the US said, hey, we tried this, it made most of our money, we liked it at the time, and then we got a little bit smarter, and that's why we didn't use tariffs other than minuscule amounts. But fundamentally, if we go back to it, right, none of us on this phone can change the policy coming out of the White House, is it will have an impact on your business, and it will have an impact on especially new construction, and we will keep you updated on this in the months ahead.
Mm-hmm. But we have one question I'd like you to handle real quick, if you don't mind. And this is going to go back, and we're at 9:09. So if anybody needs to drop, we completely understand. Somebody had asked if a seller wants to list a home in the summer, how do I help them make the best decision on timing, right? Is it better for them to list in the spring, or is it better for them to wait to the summer? What does the data suggest, and how can they best allow that seller to see the data so they can make a wise decision on what's best for their household?
One of the things, obviously, and I'm sure you know this, is the biggest thing is, how do you have a conversation with the seller about what matters most to them, right? Is it netting the most amount of money? Is it the easiest and smoothest process? Or is it selling by a specific date? And then when you find out those 3 things, right? Netting the most amount of money, selling by a specific date, ease of process, or again, maybe something else divorce, or activity of something that's a big life event. Then you want to ask them the questions that get to the emotional heart of the issue, right? Specifically, right, when you think about this home, what are you going to miss the most, right? Okay, what does your next chapter look like? And then 3, specifically, when you think about your last home sale, what did you like? What did you not like? Maybe they had a great experience. Maybe they had a horrible experience. When you get through that set of activities, you're going to find out, again, what's most important. If it's timing, timing will take care of itself. If it's netting the most amount of money, here is part of the data to look at. And again, this is where you've got one thing on one hand and one on the other. Historically, sellers who sold and closed in May, June, or July netted the most amount of money. And as we went through on our presentation 2 months ago, in order to be able to sell in May, June, they had to basically start in November. Right? Staging, photography, cleaning, repairs, contracts, all the stuff. And then specifically, though, your counterpoint to that right now is this slide right here. The price reductions are up a material amount compared to where they were before. In my opinion, and again, this is nothing more than my opinion, even though historically we have been up in the May, June, July timeframe, this data to me is more scary. And I would recommend, if they are looking to net the most amount of money, that they get on the market as quickly as possible. They price as appropriate as they can to where the market is, maybe event-based pricing, to get out, because I am concerned that this data of the increased price reductions will lead to drops in prices that we have not experienced over the last few years. Again, I don't think there are going to be massive price changes, but the data on the number of increased price reductions typically leads to fall in prices, and that starts a downward cycle.
However, if they are not motivated by making the most amount of money, and there's another reason why timing is more critical to them, then it is appropriate for them to make that choice. You just want to show them the information so they can make the decision that's right for them and their household.
Fantastic. Paige, do we have any other questions?
I think that we're over time. You guys have been more than generous. We will see you on the 5th for those of you who want to join us. Otherwise, have a fabulous, fabulous real estate weekend ahead.